Hello and welcome to another edition of the Tigers Down Under. I'm your host, Alex, and with me I have Logan. How are you, Logan?
Yeah, hey Alex. Yeah, doing all right, mate. It's been an all right week. Interesting start to the season, but yeah, look, it's good to have football back. All in all, I think a lot to get excited about, and I guess it's just that stage of the season when we have to start getting match fit for the late stay-ups.
That's it, and it's good to have football back. Plenty to talk about, plenty to get our teeth into, as it were. I am just recovering from a cold, so forgive me for probably a bit of a stuffy-nosed sound to my voice. But look, we'll dive straight into it with that Norwich game last weekend, and it seemed for all of the 94, 95 minutes that it was going the way of a lot of our preseason games, and it was destined for a 1-1 finish until, you'd probably say Norwich deserved to win the game. So it was probably a deserved winner that they scored right at the end there. But I guess starting with the first half in particular, what was your sort of sense, I suppose, of the way we were playing? And obviously took the lead through Delat, but what was your sense of that game?
Yeah, it was, as you kind of mentioned, one of those games where it was unbelievable, to be honest, when we took the lead. And, as you kind of touched on, it was an unbelievable turn of events in Delap scoring. And kind of, someone who we'd speculated on in the preseason about not having the greatest goal scoring record for all of the huff and puff and I guess qualities that, he certainly seems to present to score a goal of that quality. I was pinching myself when I saw that we led. And I guess, if you're a Norwich fan watching that game, you would have been bewildered at some of the chances that, didn't find their way to the back of the net. So we really weathered a storm. And I don't know if we weathered a storm through good defending or just, pure luck, really. So to go in at halftime, 1-1, when it very easily could have been 1-0 lead at halftime if it wasn't for that, excellent finish. An incredibly remarkable game to watch. And look, we look scared. I think from all the things that Rosinya talks about with his philosophy is he does want players to be brave on the ball. He wants us to play out from the back, and he wants us to be able to control possession and hold the ball so that we're not giving, teams that sniff. And that's probably many championship managers' philosophy, but he's really, made a conscious effort to stick to it. So I thought in trying to do that, we struggled. And I don't know if that was just because it was the first day of the season and there was a lot of nervous energy. I don't know if you caught the post-match press conference with him where he talked about at halftime actually needing to calm the players down. And I thought that he summed it up brilliantly. I thought that was exactly what it looked like. We were very overhyped, maybe overstimulated, and really tried to maybe do too much as far as stick to this philosophy, whereas in some ways we kind of look nervous on the ball because of that. So I feel like I'm talking in circles here. Interesting game. Norwich looked by far the better side, but as you said, the longer the game went on, the more confident we got in the sense that we could have actually stolen a point from it, which would have been a very brave point given the balance and given the fact that our performance, with the exception of the individual goal by Delap, really wasn't anything to write home about.
Yeah, I certainly felt like we built into it in the second half. That first half, there was a couple of times where, the goalpost came to our rescue with some of those shots from Norwich. And as you said, on another day, they could have had quite a few goals in that first half. It is an interesting one. And I think what I'm seeing a lot through social media and other platforms from City fans is there's a lot of people jumping to conclusions or drawing bigger conclusions than would be the case from a single game, where I sort of like to think of it as the fact, if this was a game that was being played in the middle of December, would we have the same sorts of overreactions or concerns about the team as we are having it been the first game of the season? And I think, obviously there's the natural expectation of trying to extrapolate from this and say, well, if this is how we're going to play throughout the season, then we're in trouble. But as you say, I think there's that element of being overhyped and sort of saying you've had the whole summer to build up to this game, and now we're here, and how you're going to perform in this game. I think it's going to be really interesting to see the next couple of games, and we need to sort of see this style of play out, through a sample of games to really draw any big conclusions. But as you sort of said, even just that second half was a step up on that first half, and really saw an improved performance.
Is there any part of you that kind of, speculates on the team that I guess that is Norwich being one of the bigger fish in the championship pond? I guess, like, if you think back to the season before, where we were away at Preston and pulled that remarkable 4-1 victory, is that part of it? Does that in any way, shape or form factor into your thinking on the nerves that perhaps were present on the opening day?
I mean, funnily enough, for the players potentially, because the players might view it in the same way. But I mean, personally, there's been a lot of discussion in the preseason about how poor Norwich had been over the off-season in terms of their recruitment, in terms of who they'd lost, in terms of, even just down to the fact that Wagner hasn't had a great track record as a manager outside of a little purple patch with Huddersfield getting them promoted to the Premier League. So there was actually a lot of cause for concern for Norwich in a lot of different circles. Now, of course, that can be completely different from what the players are experiencing, what the players perceive. And as you say, I mean, Norwich were a Premier League side not too long ago. So certainly it would be seen as a bigger fixture in that sense. It'd be really interesting to see in a similar way, almost, that even though Sheff Wednesday have come up from League One, it's the local derby. It's, you've got your Regan Slater going up against, his boyhood rivals, that sort of thing. There'd be a lot of feeling in the squad as well going into that game, first home game of the season, all of that as well. So it will be really interesting to see how Rossini goes with coaching the players and preparing them mentally for these sorts of games, because at the end of the day, if we want to be up there challenging for the top 6, for the top 2, you've almost got to put that stuff out of your mind, and you've got to almost be saying we deserve to be in these matches and deserve to do better than we're doing, as we did against Norwich. So look, it could certainly have played a part, and that's why I think people trying to jump to conclusions or extrapolate too much from a single game. We'll talk about the Doncaster game in a second, but it is a single league game at this stage. There's still a lot of water to go under the bridge in that sense. I guess the other element to talk about with this game is the new players, or how you saw some of the players looking. Ruben Vinagre debuting on the left-hand side, probably a disappointing debut from my perspective. I actually didn't realise until I looked at the stats afterwards that he was actually quite poor. And I don't know, you were quite critical of Louis Coyle during the game, but when you actually look at Vinagre's stats, he was arguably even worse.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and certainly in our group chat, I was very quick to throw stones at Louis Coyle's direction, but I think it probably shone out more in the way that I talked about. The way that I felt was, particularly if you want to play the Rossini philosophy, Louis Coyle just looked very wasteful on the ball, and a lot of the opportunities that Norwich had, they were pressing, they were playing quite high pressure, and certainly had the momentum in that first half. And I thought Louis Coyle defended quite well. It was just that when he was on the ball and looking to play out, he just gave away far too many possessions, and really put us back under the pump, and made it really difficult to kind of get a foothold in the game and take some of the pressure off by playing some element of attacking football. I agree. I didn't really see much of in Vinagre to warrant the fact that he was kind of our big off-season signing. And so, certainly from that standpoint, I was disappointed. But, I guess the feature of the match was certainly the way that Delap got forward. And as a new signing, you couldn't really hope for a better debut. I think he scored in the 20th minute or around about that mark. And really, he was the bright spot going forward with, maybe Regan Slater. I know he's obviously not a new player, but they, to me, seem to be the two kind of focal points where if anything good was going to happen, it did or was going to come from them. And so, yeah, I thought, as you said, Vinagre wasn't anywhere near what I expected or debut. I thought Delap far surpassed my expectations. So,
Yeah, I mean, Delap for me, and I heard a bit of talk about him in pre-season, and as we talked about him in our prediction episode, where, as much as you don't want to heap that sort of pressure on a striker, there is such a weight of expectation on a striker's shoulders, where if they can get that goal in the first or second game, it can just define their season in such a positive way, because it can give them that confidence to go on with it. And similarly, if they struggle and don't score for the first couple of games, it can really make it tough for them to get going after that point. So for him to score in the manner that he did as well, it wasn't like it was a scuffed shot. It wasn't as if it was a penalty or something like that. It was a proper, well-taken goal, harassing the defense, winning the ball, and really great finish on him. It's such a positive for him. And the fact that it wasn't even just the goal, it was his all-round play as well. You know, you look at the fact that he was providing an outball for the defense and the midfield. He was holding the play up well. He was, winning fouls from Norwich players. He just had this all-round element to his game that would have filled his teammates with a lot of confidence as well, because I'm sure having a 20-year-old striker leading the line with, as a player that you've not necessarily had a whole lot to do with before that point, you don't necessarily know what they're all about in a professional competitive game. It would have filled the rest of the team with such confidence and given them that sort of reliance on his ability.
Yeah, and it wasn't just that. I know that there was in the second half that the shot that he had saved as well from range. But as you said, every single time he seemed to kind of get possession of the ball, he looked dangerous, and he looked dangerous from deep. He was confident to carry it out the defenders and pull the trigger. And I think in a game like that, when you're under the pump, that's exactly what we're going to be asking of our forward men to be able to offer some level of threat. And I think it gives you hope later in the season. As you said, if that game had been, judged on if that's still what we look like in December, that's really different. But, the reality is that away from home in the championship, there are going to be games where you're going to experience, long periods of pressure under the pump. And you want to make sure that when you do get the opportunity to counter, that you offer some level of threat. And, Osterbinian probably isn't that type of player. He's not built on pace. The fact that you can give the ball to Delap near halfway, and we can see that he can turn on the ball and straight away run at defenders and, have some level of a finish on him, I think, bodes really well for the future. And, if you're going to be on debut and look for an opportunity to endear yourself to your new fans, he couldn't really have done more on Saturday. So, yeah, it was a fine performance. And I was really, really impressed with what I saw.
That's probably a good segue then to give our votes for the game if you wanted to kick us off.
Yeah, look, it's without a shadow of a doubt, I think Delap has to have the 3 points. I've alluded to it. I would have given Regan Slater the 2, and Matty Ingram got 1 point for me, just by sheer way of whether it was from great keeping or sheer luck. The fact that given the amount of pressure that we sustained, that he only conceded 1 goal, and that 1 goal was a screamer of that. So he snuck in for the 1 point for mine. How did you see it?
Yeah, good chat. Look, I was pretty much the same as you. I just flipped Ingram and Slater, so I still had Delap as man of the match in my view. I had 2 votes for Ingram just because, as you say, the weight of shots that he was facing, especially in that first half, made a terrific save midway through that half as well, which, point blank save, which is what he's always been reliable in doing. I think, there's plenty of discussion around footwork and distribution and that sort of thing, but primarily as a shot stopper, Ingram is pretty top notch. And then, Slater for the 1 vote. I thought, whilst he, the midfield got bypassed a lot of the game in all manners of the game, but I think when he got forward into the box, his footwork and his ability to drive forward and create chances in the box, we saw it a couple of times last season, but I'm sure he'll draw, his fair share of penalties because of the way that he can get into the box and move the ball between defenders, create opportunities as well. So he'll be scoring and creating chances for players as well. So I thought that was really impressive from him. Okay, well, let's talk the Doncaster game. And it's full disclosure, I haven't actually watched the full game. I've seen highlights and I've read a fair bit about this game. So I won't talk about it as if I've seen the game in any sense in that way. I don't think you've seen the game either, have you, Logan?
I've seen the highlights.
I think it sounds as if we got off pretty lightly having just seen the highlights, because it sounds like it was a pretty poor display. Rossini himself also pretty critical of the display of the players. Using the context of the discussion for that Norwich game of saying, we are just a couple of games into the season and not trying to draw too many conclusions. I suppose the only concern I'd have really is it's sort of 2 games into the season, a goal scored in each game, losing the games 2-1. This one, you have the first goal being sort of the quintessential bugbear goal that people had last season of playing out from the back, Traore with a poor touch, kind of letting Doncaster into the game. But and look, obviously highlights are going to sort of mask some of the issues, but I actually thought the way that we were playing in that first half and the way that we won the ball for our goal was really positive. And I think clearly the players sort of went into their shells once we conceded and they got a bit more concerned about the game. But I'm struggling to get too over the top about this performance at this stage.
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt. I think, week one, the focus is definitely on the championship season. And around one of the League Cup, I've kind of always held the philosophy with League Cups. And I don't know if this is a defeatist attitude, but there's very much a perception that you don't really care about it till you find yourself in a position where, there's something to get excited about. So if that's like the round of 16 or, you find yourself in the semis, well, all of a sudden, it becomes a big day out for the club and you get excited about the prospect of, of winning silverware or potentially booking a date with one of the, the biggest clubs in the country. And when you're playing, no disrespect to the likes of Donny or, a lesser known club this early on in the season, it's definitely not, something that features in the planning. Other than the fact that it's an opportunity for players to get a run out and, see what potential other squads or, 50% of the squad kind of look like. And that's very much, if there is a disappointing aspect to draw from this fixture, it's the fact that it was a different squad to the one that played against Norwich and it didn't perform. And I think that if we're, if that's the takeaway, then it shows that this early on in the season, there's still a lot of work to be done, which in some ways it tells us what we already know. So yeah. I'm not about to get on the, on the podcast and start talking about how it's doom and gloom after 1 week of the season because we've been bundled out of the League Cup. If the League Cup was our expectation of the season that we had to win the League Cup, well then, then we can start preaching misery and sadness and doom and gloom, but it's just not. It's not a feature, and I'm really not perturbed by it. Other than the fact that there's a lot more football to be played, and we really do need to start showing signs of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, and if you're sort of looking at it as well, look, we've been embarrassed and we've lost to this lower league club. I'd rather be having that sort of shock to the system in a League Cup match, which doesn't have an impact on our league season, rather than, beating Doncaster in the cup, but then losing to Sheff Wednesday and going, oh, geez, we've just lost to a club that's been promoted from League One and have, I'd rather, I say this now, we could still lose to Sheff Wednesday. Of course, I'm not banking the 3 points, but I guess what I mean is that with the transfer window still open and, Rosenior's comments today or yesterday about the fact that we're getting pretty close to a couple of signings, you'd like to think that these sorts of shocks to the system are actually a positive in saying, here's a reality check, here's what the capabilities of the squad currently are, and the fact that we still do need a few additions to really get to where we want to get to.
Absolutely, and if anything else can be drawn from that, it's an opportunity for Liam Rosenior to show players that the pre-season result, and I know we accumulated a lot of draws, but largely I think were undefeated. We very much need to understand that, like with the season starting, it's not okay to put in subpar performances, particularly if you are one of those shadow players that is looking for a run in the first team. Then you need to really do something to be able to displace the person that he's given the start to. And so that's we need to be realistic. And I think that if as you said at the start, if at December we're having these conversations and we've gone on a losing run where we're out of the other cup and there's not really much to get excited about, and it looks like it's a survival season, then by all means we can start to have a conversation about how poor the football is. But until we've seen another 4, 5, 6 games, I think that it's just far too early to comment.
Yeah, and I guess on a positive front, Makilo looked pretty positive. Obviously, only saw him in the highlights, creating the opportunity for Oscar's first goal. And Oscar, I don't know what it is about him. He just seems to have a knack for being in the right place at the right time and time again. And it's one of those things where you sort of look at it and go, oh, well, geez, he's lucky. He happened to be there. And you go, yeah, but when he does it sort of 15 or 20 times, is it luck or is it actually just knowing where he needs to be?
He just has that presence about him where he's very willing to throw himself about and has a very what's the word? He looks very coordinated and has a great sense of reaction time. So when those opportunities of like, the pinball balls kind of just appear at his feet, it very much, and it looks like scuffed. You see the replay and it's kind of intentional that he's been able to get himself in that position and angle the ball in the right direction. So yeah, I tend to agree that the build-up play in most of Oscar's goals always looks extremely sus, but when he does find himself to the opportunity to be on the end of it, it always seems to be directed the right way. So, fair play to him.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's segue then. So what we do every couple of years is we sort of we take stock on the squad. We'll do a bit of a review of a different player each week. And I found it interesting to start with Matt Ingram, who caps his City career with 100 appearances against Norwich. I think he's the only player that survives from the last time we did this series. So I had a listen to that the other day when I chatted to Dan about Matt Ingram way back in the League One season when he was the understudy to George Long. And at the time we were sort of saying that he was the deserved number one over George Long. And he was sort of making his way into the City team. And now we're sort of almost sitting here saying, is he on his way out in terms of whether the club's recruiting a new goalkeeper? And we've seen him, he's sort of seen off a couple of challenges now because he obviously had Nathan Baxter as his competition 2 seasons ago. Then he had Carl Darlow last season and Baxter again last season. And he's seen off both of them. And he's still here as the current number one anyway. So obviously 101 appearances now with that appearance against Doncaster, 36 clean sheets in that time, signed on a free transfer from QPR all the way back in 2019. It's a pretty reasonable bit of business for what at the time was a pretty unnoteworthy signing, I suppose. What's your take on Ingram's City career?
Ingram's City career has been, like, as you said, there's not really anything to pinpoint and say that, he's an awful player. I can certainly remember, worse keepers in previous years, that certainly in the era that we've been watching City. And he's not a name that I would in any way, shape or form kind of, put in that conversation as the worst keepers we've seen. But I think the biggest undoing of Matt Ingram's career is the fact that we got to see that window where he was there when Darlow was. And I think that the fact of the matter is Darlow's just a better keeper. And so from a City fan's perspective, he's kind of unlucky because we just bemoan the fact that it's kind of, if anything, shone a light on the fact that there's far better keepers out there that around, I guess Darlow's wages are a different problem, but it kind of shows what is available. So without Ingram, doing anything wrong, and as you said, like we talked about him before in making our 3-2-1s on the opening day of the season, and both of us had him in the conversation. It's just been a very safe kind of career at City where he hasn't done too much wrong, but at the same time hasn't set the world on fire, and we haven't really shown that much ambition to replace him.
Yeah. It's a crazy one when you reflect on the fact that he's made 100 City appearances, which I don't know the exact numbers, but that's got to be in the same ballpark as your Alan McGregors. It's going to be more than your Kupovic. It's going to be, it's going to be less than Myhill. Myhill would have had more than that. But it's a solid number of appearances. But I just can't think that in 5 years' time we're not going to look back and say, oh yeah, he's a City keeper that I think of when you think of goalkeepers at Hull City. Like he's just like. And I really don't mean that in a disparaging way, but it's just like, as you say, I mean, he doesn't do anything particularly wrong, but he also doesn't do anything particularly amazing either. So he's just very reliable, which is good, but it just makes it hard to, as you say, when you then get presented with, here's a better keeper, you go, well, yeah, Darlow is a better keeper. And it's why I suppose managers keep trying to bring in a better keeper. And it's just a really funny one.
I think this is a conversation in some ways kind of transcends the City podcast when we talk about goalkeepers. But so much of a keeper to me seems these days is based on personality. Like we really, seem to cherish goalkeepers that are really, outspoken in kind of celebrating or screaming at defenders or whatever it is. Like, Kupovic, for me, was like, let's not forget how horrible the start of his career at City was and how underwhelming the guy was.
Against the familiar opposition as well.
That's right. And all of a sudden, he went on a run of games where it was quality, but because he spoke so, positively of the City fans and really was kind of animated in
He
his
was a pretty,
approach.
yeah, he was a bit of a show pony, wasn't he?
That's right. And as soon as he went down that track, all of a sudden, like City fans quickly forgot about the grim period that we experienced under Jakubovic, and were calling for, like, we need to get him back from Leicester. It was criminal that he was sold for church change. And I just think that that's the type of stuff that we really need to kind of remember, that being a quiet and reliable goalkeeper actually probably lends itself to he's better than we think.
Yeah.
Because we're not speaking of him week in, week out, saying that, there's another howler. I don't know how he goes as far as playing out from the back. I don't think that he's necessarily a sweeper keeper that fits the Rosignol philosophy of, like, starting attacks from the back. But, it also doesn't look, at least initially, that we've got an urgency to replace him. And so,
yeah, and so I mean, like, we didn't really touch on it with the Doncaster game. I know that there was a lot of criticism of him, and I think pretty unfairly, about the fact that Doncaster apparently, once they clocked onto our strategy, basically just went, well, we're not going to press the goalkeeper. We're going to let him have the ball. We'll just man mark the defense. And Ingram just went, well, crap, what do I do? And he just held the ball. Yep. And everyone got pretty fed up with him doing that. But at the same time, you think, well, you've got to have the players in front of him have got to move and make options and give him people to pass it to. So it's a bit unfair. I mean, obviously, he's obviously going to be the main focus when it comes to criticism of playing out for the back, because everything starts with him. But it's also pretty unfair. So I think he's in a pretty luckless sort of position at the moment as a City keeper. But, 100 appearances, 36 clean sheets, it's sort of 1 in 3, bit more than 1 in 3. That's not horrible. It's a pretty decent career.
Well, and especially when you consider the period that we've been on, where we've been through a few managers, and we haven't exactly been setting the world on fire as far as promotions go, with the exception of that League One campaign. But in the fact that he's kind of been the gatekeeper of that time period, that's certainly not a poor record by any means. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see what happens with him in the next 6 months or so.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, let's wrap things up then and chat Chef Wednesday. That's who we're facing tomorrow night, midnight Australian time, just promoted from League One. It's actually very funny when I look at the nature of their off-season, when I think of, obviously probably the most memorable fixture against them in recent times being the playoff final at Wembley, where shortly after that, Bruce quit the club and we were sort of thrown into turmoil as we went up to the Premier League. In a quite similar way, I mean, Chef Wednesday have been promoted with a Windass scoring the winning goal at Wembley for them, with Darren Moore then, depending on who you listen to, either being sacked or walking away from the job at Chef Wednesday over wages or transfers or whatever it might be, replaced by Xisco Munoz, who was the Watford manager, got them promoted a couple of years ago. So, a little bit of pedigree to him, but from all reports, that Watford squad was pretty talented, and he just had to go in and basically not stuff things up, which he managed to do. Makes it a pretty interesting transition period for them. I know they've made a few signings recently, so they've sort of steadied the ship a little bit, but there did seem to be a lot of concerns around them as they came up to the Championship. And then if they faced Southampton on the opening day of the season and didn't really disgrace themselves. They lost 2-1 with a late goal themselves, so pretty similar to us. But look, it's first home game of the season. We sort of talked about this before, but first home game of the season, Yorkshire derby of sorts. It's a great opportunity. If City can come out with a really positive performance, then you'd think that a lot of the concerns and criticisms of the first week could get washed away.
Yeah, certainly. I think that's we never start looking at the league table until you've kind of watched at least like 10, 15 rounds. And the opening day of a season isn't an indicator by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, let's not forget that I think after round 5 or round 6 last season, we were first. So it definitely gives you a perspective. But you're right. Like, you do want to get back on the horse really quickly. The last thing you want to do is heading into, I think it's the international break week, like usually like the fourth or fifth round. I think we play like 3 games before we have a break. the last thing you want to do is get to that period without having experienced a win. And I think that Yorkshire Derby is a very, very quick fire way to forget the fact that we didn't get any points on the opening day against Norwich, despite the fact that from all reports we probably could have. But we don't want to get to the end of the season and start counting points back and go, oh, if we only had have taken that, held on for that extra 30 seconds against Norwich or whatever it was. And the easiest way to do that is to bank threes.
Yeah, no doubt. So are you feeling, I suppose, positive heading into the... I mean, it's hard to be overly positive given the first two games, but I suppose first game at home for the season against a promoted team, it must be reasonably positive that we can get a good performance out of this one.
Look, I'm taking the Doncaster result out of it, and I think that a lot of confidence will actually be taken from the Norwich game, given the fact that in no way, shape or form did we perform how the gaffer would have liked, how the players would have liked, and away from home at Norwich, no less. Like Carrow Road is a very tough place to go. And I think the fact that, we've had that poor result against Donny probably means that they'll be almost more up for the local derby at home, and we'll feel not necessarily a sense of pressure, but a real strong desire to get on the board and do well. I'm feeling quite confident about this game, and that's not a disrespect to Chef Wednesday at all. I do think that City will have learnt from the opening weekend. I'm very primed to see a very positive performance against Wednesday.
And then I guess in terms of the lineup, I think last week probably the biggest surprise was Christie not starting and having Coyle in the team. Would you say? Look, it's hard to know. I think Christie started in the League Cup game and by all reports is pretty rusty. So perhaps he's not quite ready to go from the start against Wednesday. But if he is, I suspect that would be probably the main change to the lineup.
Look, potentially. I also do think that Rosenior seems to have a blind love for Coyle. I think he really appreciates the fact that he's a homegrown boy, and the fact that anything that you say about Louis Coyle, and as much as I've kind of slated him for his performance on the ball, he is a workman-like performer, and he won't let you down as far as effort goes. And I think that those characters in the dressing room, particularly when you're trying to implement a new playing philosophy, are really important. And so as much as I thought Christie was one of our best performers last year, I thought he was unbelievable. Like, I was amazed at how good he was going forward, and some of the individual or patches of individual brilliance he showed was just unreal. But as you said, he did look a little bit rusty, and I wouldn't be surprised if Rosenior backed Coyle for a little bit longer. I think Christie's probably long term the front runner, but I certainly don't think that Coyle has gone down in stock after his first week. And if he was to start this weekend, I wouldn't by any stretch be surprised.
Yeah, and then I guess the other one is Oscar versus, well, I don't know if it's Oscar versus Delap or whether you throw them both in together. And it seemed as if against Norwich we had two fans sort of operating as either that second striker or kind of in behind, but it's quite a difficult one because you had Delap scoring against Norwich and Oscar scoring against Doncaster. It's, you got two strikers in form.
And Tufan was fairly quiet against Norwich, I thought. I really was kind of disappointed given what we'd seen from him in the preseason. I thought he was going to...
season in waiting.
That's right. Like, it was certainly a conversation, and the fact that he didn't perform on the opening day, I don't think Rosenior's that fickle. I think that at this stage he's going to try and kind of stick to an 11, work out what his best formation is, and try and give them a little bit of run of games. I know that doesn't always work with like the tactical nous for the team that we're lining up against, but the fact that it is at home may suggest somewhat of a change in shape. And I think we'll really look to kind of play a lot more attacking against Wednesday. I'd be surprised if he's defensive minded on the opening home game of the season. So I think Oscar, if anything, will probably come off the bench. Delap definitely has to start, given his performance on the opening day. Yeah, the conversation for Oscar to be in there is there, but I just don't think we'll see it.
And then score prediction for this one?
Yeah, look, it's a hard one to predict, but I do feel confident. I think I'm being super ambitious, but I'm going to say 2-0 City.
Yeah, I was thinking exactly the same. So I'll go 2-0 as well. Maybe a 2-1 if they can sneak a goal. But I think at home we'll be super keen to sort of rectify the last two performances, and I'm hoping that we can get on the score sheet in a good way. Well, look, thank you for joining me for this one, Logan.
My pleasure, Alex. Always good to be here.
And thanks everyone for listening in. We're a little bit later this week than usual, but we'll be back next week to review that Sheffield Wednesday game and look ahead to the next game of the season. But until then, come on, City.